MCU was packed full of amazing moments that left us in awe as the world of cinema was introduced to its newest franchise. From a billionaire genius forging an escape from captivity using only a box of scraps, to an alien invasion that brought together a group of unique people that had nothing in common with one another. The MCU began to plant the seeds for what the future would hold. In Phase 2, however, they managed to take things even further as new characters were introduced, more battles were waged, and more avenging was done. Hello everyone, I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I will be ranking all 7 movies from Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This list will be based on how much I enjoyed each of these movies, or just how important I felt they were to the broader scale of the MCU as a whole, or how they connected things together to what the future would hold in the MCU, things like that. So let's begin. Starting with number 7, I have Thor the Dark World. This second outing for the God of Thunder sees him dealing with the aftermath of Loki's attack on Earth in the first Avengers movie that we saw in Phase 1. What this movie did well was introduce us to the history of the 6 Infinity Stones through the discovery of what is known as the ether, which is basically just a powerful sludge that could apparently make everything very dark for some reason. Although it did set up part of the bigger picture of what was yet to come in the MCU, the movie wasn't all that exciting in terms of action or suspense, in my opinion. There was just a generic bad guy that really had no threatening qualities of his own, other than the power he got from the ether to wreak a little bit of havoc on London, England. I mean, it wasn't what it was kind of hyped up to be, I guess. That's why I thought it was the weakest entry in Phase 2. All it did by the end of the movie was prove to us how truly gullible Thor is when it comes to trusting Loki. That's all it did. Let me just set one thing straight before I continue, though. I have nothing against Iron Man or any of the films he's in. I think he's a really cool character and has flaws like anybody else does that lead to more destruction for everyone around him. All other characters in the MCU seem to have this as well. Things happen. That being said, Iron Man 3 I don't think was the best movie of Phase 2 and didn't really set up anything new for the next phase either. In fact, by the end, we were sort of led to believe that Tony Stark had given up on being Iron Man and was looking to stop creating the Iron Man suits altogether. But they completely ignored that fact for the second Avengers movie and had him in it anyways. If I were to compare this to the first 2 Iron Man movies, I'd put it at number 2 because it was definitely better than Iron Man 2 by a large margin. But nothing beats the initial movie, Iron Man 1 that kicked off the MCU, am I right? I mean, that was the movie that started it all for us. What I did like about this movie was that it showed how Tony Stark was suffering from PTSD following the events of the Avengers movie, like the alien invasion and stuff. And it showed us how someone like him deals with trying to understand those events. Like in this movie, as you all know, I'm sure, his way of dealing with it was continuing to build new Iron Man suits in a hope that he could protect the Earth and the woman he loves from another alien attack or something much worse coming to Earth. I also like the unique abilities of all the Iron Man suits that Tony built throughout the film. Some of them were pretty cool. Even though we only got to see them, they were like a one-off because all the suits get blown up at the end anyways, but I still enjoyed that dynamic of things and the uniqueness of each suit that he built. For that reason alone, I thought it was a good movie overall, but I don't think it deserves to be any higher on this list or closer to number 1 or anything like that. The second Guardians movie, which apparently in canon takes place a few months after the events of the first one, even though it was released, I think it was released in 2017, which would have been around the start of Phase 3, if I'm not mistaken. It didn't exactly do a lot to set up the future of the MCU, other than introduce a couple new characters that didn't really play much of a role in the outcome of this movie or any other upcoming movie. Now, the reason I don't think it was better than the first Guardians movie was because it pretty much felt like what a DLC or downloadable content is to a video game, rather than a brand new story that played off anything from the original. Like, I felt like it was just a sort of like a side quest from what the first movie was, in a way. If I were to compare it to like a video game or something, I felt like this movie was the adventure they take in this movie was more of like a side quest, just to throw another Guardians movie out there for us to watch. Sure, it tried its best to show us the ongoing tension between some of the members of the team, like Peter Quill and Rocket were sort of having issues with each other over who's the true like leader of the team and everything. And it did introduce us to a celestial being that could have destroyed the entire universe. But honestly, it didn't feel like it did anything to improve upon what the first one established. Um, I feel like they almost could have not had this movie and still would have been able to set up the Guardians for their role in the movies to come in Phase 3. What I did like about this movie, though, was how it sort of it taught the viewers a lesson in how strong friendships can never die, and that we shouldn't let anything, especially our egos, pun intended, come between ourselves and our friends. I felt like the movie was more of like a metaphor than anything else, but it was still an okay movie. It was, an intergalactic battle and big adventure and everything else, but it just wasn't nearly as exciting as some of the other movies on this list or in this phase of the MCU. At number 4, I placed AntMan here. Now, when I first saw this movie, I thought it was pretty interesting how they introduced the whole concept of like how continuously shrinking down could actually cause you to shrink out of existence, or even cause you to travel through time somehow. Like, I honestly don't know if that's something that could like really happen if somebody built this technology in real life and were able to shrink. Like, could you actually travel through time? I don't know. I'm sure it's made up just for that, but I thought it was unique and brought something new to the MCU that we hadn't seen before. This movie was fun and wacky and made me laugh at certain parts, but in terms of action or suspense, it didn't really have a whole lot of that. There were some cool fight sequences, however, that involved the shrinking technology. My favorite was like when they accidentally made a Thomas the Tank Engine toy become like life size of an actual train and bust through the wall of a house. So that was kind of something that was funny. I was a big fan of Thomas when I was a kid, so that was fun to see. Thomas the Tank Engine is destroying things. But the reason this is so close to the front of my list is because I liked it a lot more than the other movies I've mentioned so far. Just because of its how unique it was and its willingness to go places we hadn't seen yet in the MCU, like the quantum realm, which we know if you've already seen the whole all the MCU movies, we know what the future holds. The quantum realm is going to play a bigger role in the future, but we'll talk about that when we get to Phase 3. I mentioned earlier how the second one didn't excite me as much as this one did. Well, now let's talk about what made the first Guardians movie so great. First of all, I loved how it brought us to places in the universe that hadn't yet been explored in the movies before. In this movie, we were shown all sorts of like unique and interesting planets and life forms that made it stand out among all the other MCU movies. My favorite character, of course, is Groot. I mean, he's a giant tree that only says 3 words, but he definitely makes an impact when he's prompted. That's for sure. Like, my favorite scene from the movie is when he's like he grows his arm out and he's smashing people around on the walls and stuff like that, and he just turns around and smiles. Like, that was hilarious. The best part about this movie was that every battle seemed like it was very tense and left us wondering whether or not the bad guys might actually win. Not to mention, um, everything that happens in the MCU in the future could have been a lot different, could have been changed forever just from this movie alone. Because Ronan the Accuser actually threatened to go kill Thanos if once he destroyed Xandar. So in a way, it's like if the Guardians had let him go with his plan, he might have actually gone and took out Thanos, and we would have never seen the events of Infinity War and Endgame. So it did play a major role in shaping how the future of the MCU would play out and how it could have changed just from this movie alone. That's why I thought it deserved more praise than some of the other movies in Phase 2. It was a well written, well directed thrill ride of a movie that I've enjoyed watching over and over again. I'm sure you all agree with that. And I guess it was, critically acclaimed and stuff like that too when it first came out. So that's a thumbs up for me as well. So it was like in terms of comparing it to like when the Avengers movie, the first Avengers movie came out, it was like they brought this group of people together, like I said at the beginning of this, they brought a group of these individuals together that ended up coming together for the same cause. This was something similar with Guardians of the Galaxy, but they're a lot like weirder and stuff, and it's not exactly like the Avengers, but there are some similarities. So that was also cool, but they did it in one movie rather than building up the Guardians across several movies like they did with the Avengers, which isn't a bad thing at all. They made it work. When I was thinking about what my top two movies were going to be on this list, I struggled putting I struggled between one and two, like what I wanted here, and I decided to go with Avengers: Age of Ultron at number two. The only reason I didn't consider this my favorite movie of Phase Two was because even though it was an Avengers movie and did feature like all the original, the main Avengers that were in the first one, while also adding a few new ones, I didn't feel like the same amount of excitement that I did for the original. Like the first Avengers movie brought everything together well, and when we finally got to see the Avengers team up for the first time, it felt amazing to experience that. But this movie basically just threw them back into the fight and introduced a new villain for them to take down, and things like that. Like they were already right at the beginning of the movie, they were already teaming up again. It wasn't like they were just kind of here this time rather than showing us like I mean, it did give us all the individual movies like with Thor and Iron Man and stuff, but other than that, um, it threw them back into another fight. That being said, it was still better than every other movie I've mentioned so far because it slowly planted the seeds for the dissension between the members of the team that, as we know, will of course lead to their eventual downfall in the future. Now, if I had been seeing these movies for the first time, like you'd have no clue that this is going to become a bigger issue in the future of the MCU, like where Cap and Tony already arguing over what's what, or the team not agreeing with some things the other members of the team are doing, things like that. You have no idea that that's going to play a bigger role in like basically what would be the next movie featuring most of the Avengers, with Captain America Civil War coming up in Phase 3. So that's what made it, that's what intrigued me the most was that they just gave us a small glimpse into what was going to happen, like the dissension between the team, like I mentioned. Now let's move on to the movie I truly felt was the best movie of Phase 2, Captain America the Winter Soldier. Honestly, there is nothing bad I can say about this movie at all. Like, I actually struggled when I was trying to figure out if this one should be first or second on my list, like I said. But what made this movie so great was that it didn't even feel like an actual, like, superhero movie, but more like an action or spy thriller, such as, like, a James Bond movie or a Mission Impossible. And it had a very nice mix of, like, mystery and sort of like a spy thriller and espionage to it that kept me watching from the beginning. The only thing that qualified it as a superhero movie, other than I mean, it obviously was made by Marvel and it is a superhero movie, but like, was that Captain America was in it. Like, there weren't any like super powered people fighting each other. There wasn't like Thor wasn't in this movie shooting lightning or throwing his hammer around, or there was no Hulk. It was just a very grounded movie, um, that's similar to what they did with like the Dark Knight trilogy with Batman. This movie that's what made this movie stand out the most, was that it was more dark and grounded compared to like the first Captain America movie, and where that focused on his origin, this focused on like the ghosts of his past type thing, and even like that there was something going on with Shield, that Hydra had actually invaded Shield and stuff, and you start to piece together like, okay, well Hydra actually built Shield then, and that's a big threat to the future of the MCU as well. So that's it for my list, everyone. Let me know what you thought of my rankings down in the comments section, and be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. I'd love to hear where each of you placed these movies on your own like personal rankings list. Did you think, or do you agree with mine as well? Thank you for watching, everyone, and take care.